Hello again. We're going to follow on from the last one, and we're going to get onto the outliner and the other bits. It's a necessity, but we don't need to go through all of it, thankfully. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I've set up a couple of things here because I'm going to talk, when I get to this, I'm going to talk about what I've set up here. But first of all, let's talk about the outliner. So this isn't like Photoshop in terms of layers below are underneath. So the camera is not above the cube. It's not above the icosphere. It's just a way of displaying the objects in the scene. So if I click any of them, you'll see it's outlined in here. And if I click any of the objects in here, you'll see they are they're selected in the outliner as well. If I wanted to select multiple objects, I can either do it by shift selecting as you would in your file structure in Windows or your Mac. So you can select double like that using shift, or I can just click and hold and select a bunch of them. And important to note, what you see here is you've got a yellow outline and everything else has got an orange outline. And what that's saying is this information, and for instance, the material information or any of the constraints or anything down here or the modifiers will show up for this one. So if I add just any old subdiv, so now I've added something to this modifier. If I shift click the cube, now this is the first one selected. Everything else is still selected, but it's showing you what's the active selection. So if I select shift select this one instead, I'm on the icosphere, there's nothing there. If I shift select this one, you can see the active element has this. So the yellow shows you what the active one is and what all of this information is related to. And the orange outline is for what you also have selected. So to separate these in here, you could just click this button, new collection, and then same thing, shift drag, put them into this collection. So now that collection is these 4 objects. If now I just wanted to move these 2 into their own collection, there's a quicker way than going click, drag thingy. Just select the objects you want, press M, and then click new collection, give it a name, Eevee, and OK. And now these 2 are in the collection Eevee. So that's how you can quickly organize your stuff. Don't worry about these down arrows with your items, your objects. It's unless you're parenting, you don't need to worry about them. And these icons over here, if you don't see all of these, if you click this button here, you have all of that there. I have these ones selected, the first 5. And I'll explain them. So with collections, all the collections have this checkbox. So if I turn off that collection, it's just these 2 have disappeared. And what that means is not only is it not in the viewport, it won't render. And by render I mean once you've set up your scene and you set your graphics card or your CPU off to start working out the light paths, working out the shadows, the colors, the textures, you get your final image. That's the render. But if that is unticked, it won't show in the render. Not only is it not in the viewport, it's also not in the render, because it's important in 3D modeling to separate the viewport from the render window when you're editing. So if we just pull down one of these, let's pick this cube. I'll just get rid of that. So we've got this cube here. And these 4 icons, there's not 5 now because you don't get this checkbox for a collection. You only get it. So you don't get this checkbox for objects, you only get it for collections. So we've only got 4 icons. So the first one, if I click this arrow, that tells me I can no longer select the cube in the viewport. So if I wanted to select a bunch of objects, but I didn't want to select one of them or several of them, I'd just make sure that's off. So now if I group select, I'm not selecting the cube. So that's what that one does. These 2 almost do the same thing. But there's a slight difference. So let's say I had, and don't worry about what I'm doing, I'll explain about multiplying objects, copying and all that stuff in a bit. So I've got a bunch of objects. Let's say in a scene, I was editing and I needed to, that's shift select again, I needed to hide these 2, right? So if I press H, I'm hiding both of them, and you'll see that their icons, these visibility icons, the eyeballs, they've gone. If I press Alt H, they both come back. You can't, there's no shortcut to individually bring things back. So pressing Alt H, so if I hid all of these, and this is useful and important, I'll get there. If I hid all of these, but now I only wanted to bring back at some point in the future, I just need to bring back those two cubes on the end. If I press Alt and H, I'm going to bring all of them back. I don't want them all back, I just want these two cubes back. So if I wanted to separate that so that when I press Alt H, I'm not bringing everything that I've pressed H on back at the same time. If I select this cube and then use this icon, which means it's not visible in the viewport, but it's not technically hidden, and do the same thing for this cube and the same thing for this cube. Oh, hello. Which cube was it? This one. That one. So they're not visible in the viewport. Now I need to hide these. In fact, I said I just wanted those cubes, didn't I? So I'm going to hide that one as well. So these are hidden. They're not. If I press H, they're hidden. But again, now I just only want to bring back those two cubes. I don't want to see the rest of the items that I've hidden. So if I press Alt H now, only the two cubes are going to come back because these ones are specifically hidden in the viewport. There's no shortcut for that. So that's what those ones do. The final icon, let me just check my time, 7:40, sweet. The final icon is the render icon. And like I said before, when you render the image, the final product will have everything in the scene that you wanted to be rendered. But if I was using this for some reason as some kind of reference for the cube that I would like to render, I would like the cube visible in my final picture, but I don't want this visible. But I still need to see it in the edit window. So here it's visible in the edit window. If I do that and uncheck that, that is now telling the software, do not render this thing. Do not just assume this thing is not there when you render out the final image. It will have no effect on the scene. There will be no shadow. There'll be nothing. It's not there because it's switched off in render. Okay, so that's all the shenanigans for that. So I'm going to delete those. And I'm going to get back to, we're going to talk about very briefly this menu because it's 8 minutes. The render menu. Is it the render menu? Yeah, render properties. The rest we'll get into as and when, but this is quite important. So what we've got is the two, I think this will be a 15-minute video because this is going to take about a few minutes to explain. So here you've got under render engine, cycles, Eevee, workbench, Eevee workbench cycles. I never use workbench. I either use Eevee or cycles, but there are big differences between the two of them, and it will affect your render dramatically depending on which one you use. So if I start with cycles, and up here you've got some icons. I might as well explain them. That'd be useful. So this icon is X-ray. So now I can see stuff through stuff, which I use all the time. And when I do, I'll show you the shortcut, but it's not important. This is wireframe. I never use. This is your normal viewport render engine. This is workbench. I never use that. And this last one is your render. So this is how your image will look as close enough when you render out. And the cycles render engine is, in my opinion, I use it mostly. 95% of the time I'm rendering in cycles purely because it's the most realistic. It's based on life, on reality. How light works in reality, how many, where the light bounces, where does it bounce to, where does it go after that? Does it cause shadow? Does it cause more shadows, caustics, refraction, all this stuff? Cycles is the best. It tries to imitate reality by calculating how light moves, basically. And it's incredible for photorealism. And here on the left, I've got a cube that I've just put a glass shader on. So it's a texture. It's made of glass, effectively. And you can see through it. You see all the refraction and stuff. Cycles is doing a pretty good job of showing me some good glass. And if I bring the icosphere into the glass, that's kind of how it looks in life. I can edit the glass if I need to, but just for this example, just bog standard glass. But if I now switch over to Eevee, which is more of a fast render engine for games and things like that, for game characters. If you want a fast render engine for editing, for things like this, Eevee is the one to go for, but it's far less complex in terms of how it deals with light. It approximates more than tries to go with the calculations. So there are sacrifices with Eevee. So if you look at the glass cube here, yeah, I can see a bit of the grid, but it stops. It's just a void, a dark grey void. And if I drag the icosphere into it, it's gone. It's gone. So Eevee is not dealing with light. You can edit the glass using Eevee with all these settings to get it better, but it's far more work than just using cycles. The caveat is cycles takes longer to render because it's got a lot more work to do. So I always use cycles. I very rarely use Eevee, but it's what you need. Feature set, not important. Supported experimental, you get a couple of extra options, but I never use it. Nearly done. This is important. The device. You've got your CPU and your GPU. That's your processor and your graphics card. And if you're going to edit preferences, these are where you can select them. I've only got my 3060 selected, but my CPU can render pretty fast as well, but nothing like the GPU. So given the option, you would always select GP compute. Don't worry about that. And then lastly, we'll look at the samples, and then we're done with this. As I say, the rest of it, it's specific to when it's needed, and then we'll discuss that when we need it. But for now, so samples is very important for your render. So in the viewport, you have a viewport render samples and a render samples. The viewport is just for what you're looking at. So if you look here, max samples, it's going to render 1024 times. So it's going to do 1024 calculations, one after the other. Keep adding and adding and adding and adding until it gets the complete picture. Normally, in previous Blender versions, it was capped at 128. So when you would start, it would stop at 128. And if you see here, samples, rendering done. If I drop this to 2 samples, rendering done, it's only rendered 2. You see how noisy that is. We call this noise. It's just bitty. It's nasty. You don't want this. There is a denoise option here. So if I click that, it will be smoother, but obviously it looks awful because it's only rendered 2 samples. It's only gone through the calculations twice. If I put that back up to 1024 with the denoiser on and move the camera, you see it's working and working and working, and now I've got a better idea of what this will look like without noise. And it's still, rendering done. So now there's no noise. And the same applies for the render. So when you want your final image, how many calculations do you want it to do? How many times do you want it to go over the same image, the same area, the same pixels to figure out how this should look? At most, I'm happy around 500 pixels. 500 samples for render. It doesn't, again, it's dependent on the scene, how much light is available, but samples 500 is, you can normally get away with that. So as I say, it's the same as this. If it was too low and I rendered at 2 samples, I'd have a really noisy image. If I render at 500 samples, I'm going to have a much less noisy image. I would never take denoise off. I'd just leave that on. I can't think of a time when you would not want to denoise and remove all of that clutter, all of that bittiness. What's that? 15. Okay, sweet, cool. We'll leave it there. Next time we come back, we're going to start talking about manipulating the shape. All right, cool. I'll see you in a moment. Bye.